Hi, everybody. Today's session is about media law, copyright, and ethics. I'm Suzette Martinez-Standring and Professor Stephen Tumolo, and on behalf of Eastern Nazarene College, we welcome Honorable Lori B. Duff, who is our expert speaker today, and thank you for your permission to tape this for future educational programs. Before we get started, I would really enjoy introducing Lori B. Duff to you today. She's the managing partner of Jones & Duff, LLC, and the municipal court judge for the city of Loganville, Georgia. She writes a bi-weekly column called Legalese, which is geared toward translating complicated legal topics into plain English. Don't we all need that? Her humor column, also bi-weekly, has been twice mentioned honorably in the annual column writing contest by the National Society of Newspaper Columnists. She is the vice president of the Council of Municipal Court Judges Association, and she also sits on the board of the NSNC as a member at large. By the way, her fourth book, a great humor book, is If You Did What I Asked in the First Place, is now available, and she can be found at www.loriduffwrites.com. Welcome, Lori. We're looking so forward to hearing your thoughts today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Now, media law and comedy, strange bedfellows, so this should be good. I guess I'll lob the question out there. On the subject of media law, what rights do journalists have, and what sources are those rights based on?
Well, the big one, the First Amendment, the right to free speech. You can say what you want when you want to say it. Of course, those rights have consequences, and the thing that people don't always remember is that you do have the right to say what you want to say, but you also have the right to suffer the consequences of what you say. That's the flip side to saying what you want to say. But we are lucky and fortunate to live in this country where we can say what we want to say, and that's where it mostly stems from, is that we have the right to speak to authority however we want to speak to authority, and we can hold authority accountable, and that's embedded in the Constitution of the United States, and that's where it all comes from.
Now, I always say that journalism is a license to be nosy, but in trying to get the facts, can you talk about the invasion of privacy and the difference between covering public figures and the grandmother down the street?
There's a huge difference, because as soon as you put yourself out in the public, you have to assume that the public is going to want to ask questions and going to want to know what's going on. So there's a huge difference between writing about Brad Pitt and writing about your Uncle Brad. Brad Pitt is a public figure, and he, by virtue of putting his face in all those movies and everything that he does, he has to understand that people are going to write about him. Whereas somebody who lives a private life has the legal term is expectation of privacy. So the question you have to ask yourself is, does this person have an expectation of privacy? And so that's how it works with, say, photographs. If you're out in a public place and you get photographed, well, you are out in a public place. You are under, these days, you have to assume that everyone and their brother has a cell phone that has a camera on it. And there's a very good chance that if you are in public, someone is going to photograph you, whether intentionally or as somebody in the background. You're going to be in somebody's picture. Whereas if you are sitting in your living room, you have an expectation of privacy, that no one is going to take a picture of you. So if someone has a telephoto lens that can somehow get through the glass without the glare getting in the way, and they take a picture of you, that's an invasion of your privacy. So if you use that photograph analogy as an example, it's the same with information. So if your information is out in the public, then you've got to assume that people are going to ask questions about that information. But if your information is private, then you have that expectation of privacy that that information will stay private. So public figures have less of an expectation of privacy. If you're out there in the world, then the world is out there looking at you.
Now we hear a lot of the word, about the word libel. Can you define libel for the viewers, and how can people spot a potentially libelous situation, and how should it be handled?
Okay, now that's a big one. So there are three different words that people get confused. There's defamation, libel, and slander. So I want to talk about the difference between those three. Defamation is kind of an umbrella term, and it means talking smack, basically. Just like saying something about somebody that they don't like, defaming their character in some way. Libel and slander are basically kinds of defamation. So the difference between libel and slander is that slander is something you say, and libel is something that you write. And that's the only difference between them. And the way I remember it is that slander starts with S and say starts with S. So spoken, say, slander. That's the way I remember it. So I hope I remembered that right. Oh God, if I didn't, that would be terrible. But anyway, so the way you get around a libel suit is by telling the truth, because truth is a defense. Truth is always a defense. So long as you are telling the truth, you will always win. Now, how do you avoid a lawsuit? You can't, because anybody can file a lawsuit. And there are crazy people out there who will file crazy lawsuits that have no merit to them. And you have to defend them. You just have to. When I was in law school, I clerked for a professor, and it just so happened that this all happened across the hallway. I went to Emory Law School, and across the hallway from the professor I clerked for was a professor named Deborah Lipstadt, who wrote a book called Denying the Holocaust, about Holocaust deniers. And one of the Holocaust deniers she wrote about, who lived in England, sued her for libel, which seems a little strange to me. And because he lived in England, he sued her in England because the book had been published in England, and in England the law is different, whereas in America you have to prove that there was defamation, and in England apparently you have to prove that there wasn't. Don't ask me. I don't know how you prove negative. But anyway, so basically she had to prove that the Holocaust happened. So, and it was this huge trial, and it all happened while I was there working in the office across the hallway from her. So it was really fascinating to watch all this. And it ended up being made into a movie. Rachel Weisz, W-E-I-S-C, however you pronounce that, played her in the movie. I forget what the movie's called, but it was really interesting because if ever there was a frivolous lawsuit, like having to prove that the Holocaust happened, this was it. So, that's proof that you cannot avoid a lawsuit. However, obviously she won because it happened. There are millions, 11 million dead people proving that it happened. But the truth is your defense. The truth is your defense. Now, sometimes what will happen is you tell the truth as you believe it to be, and then it turns out you were wrong, because we are humans and mistakes happen. And you can still win that lawsuit. And the legal standard, at least here in this country, is, were you being reckless? Were you just kind of throwing stuff out there to see what stuck? Or were you truly doing your best? In the Olympic Park bombing, for example, there was originally a lot of newspaper reports and stuff that the wrong person had done it. And that information was coming from the FBI, which is a credible source. So if you get your information from a credible source and you print it, and it turns out that you're wrong, you will win your libel suit. Now, your life and your credibility may be on the line, but you will ultimately win your suit. So what do? Well, liability insurance is a good idea, because a liability insurer will often pay for the attorney, because that's the problem, is even if you win your lawsuit, you may still have paid tens of thousands of dollars to an attorney to defend your suit. So a couple $100 a year to pay for liability insurance may be a good investment, even if you never use it. I've been a lawyer for 25 years. I've had liability insurance all those years. I've never once used it, but I sleep better at night knowing it's there. So that was a very long answer to a very short question.
No, that was a very insightful answer, a very informative answer. I remember when, getting back to covering celebrities or public figures. Now, when you're interviewing the grandma down the street and she's very unpracticed, and maybe she might say something rather politically incorrect or something bad, do you feel that it's the journalist's within the journalist's responsibility to kind of protect her in a way, not make her look so stupid in the public, or you know what I mean? I mean, what's the
right?
what's the handling of that?
Whew. That's an ethical question, not a legal question.
Okay.
It's always a good idea to record any audio statements, just because, people are always going to deny they said what they said. Always, always, always. And if you can, I do this from both ends, right? Because I write for the media, and I also give quotes to the media as a municipal court judge and as a lawyer. So I do this from both ends. And I will tell you that when I speak to the media, I will only speak to the media in writing, because I have been misquoted or been taken out of context in the past, and it irritates me to no end. And so I like to have it in writing what the question was and exactly what I answered, so that if I need to hold somebody accountable later, I can say, no, here's exactly what you emailed me, and here's exactly what I emailed you back. But that's on me, and I would imagine, like you said, I'm a little more, for want of a better term, sophisticated than, the grandma down the street who just saw this horrific car accident, and you're asking her what she saw. So, the question specifically that you asked, I think, is probably more of an ethical question than a legal question, because you don't want to twist somebody's words, because maybe she meant the stupid thing that you're trying to protect her from. And when you save her from it, when you change her words so that she sounds what in your mind is more intelligent or more rational or makes more sense in the situation, you're changing what she meant. And she didn't mean that. She meant it the way she said it. And, not everyone has the same logical framework, and not everyone views the world the way you do. And you have to be, which, is another whole, implicit bias is a whole other topic. You can't put your implicit bias, you can't fit your implicit bias onto someone else and assume that they have the same biases that you do, and therefore this is what they must have meant, because maybe they didn't.
Well, I know that part of this class does also deal with ethics, and I think that these are the kind of things that people kind of swirl around in their heads when they're interviewing people. They wonder, oh, should I change her wording, or should I, or maybe she didn't really mean to use that racial slur, things
Right.
like that.
Right.
But in your experience, what are some of the common ethical dilemmas that you kind of observe about very common things among journalists, where it may seem like there's a fine line, but from your perspective?
Where I see it, and most of the times, like I said earlier, when I've been misquoted or taken out of context, I don't think that the journalists are necessarily trying to make me look bad or trying to twist my words. A lot of times it's a space issue. Your editor says you've got 600 words or 800 words or so many column inches to tell this story. And so if, I don't always speak in sound bites. So, if I give them a 100-word quote and they've only got room for 20 of my words, which ones are they going to take out? And they've got to do it. So that's hard. It's just hard. And how do you do it? Because you want to have a quote from a particular source. You only have so much room in the article. And how do you do it while maintaining the integrity of what they intended to say? How do you do it? I don't know. I'm not that great at it. But I don't know that that's something we can address in a 5-minute answer. It's probably a whole class on its own. But it's, I don't know.
Well,
I forgot what the question was already. It's been a while and I've been rambling.
No, not at all. Not at all. Well, let's talk about protecting confidential sources. You get some information, maybe from the employee of a politician or something like that. And what are your rights in keeping those kind of sources anonymous? And what point do you have to give them up, if you give them up at all?
You don't have to. The
Mhm.
point that you have to give them up is the point that where your courage ends, because there are bullies out there, and there are powerful bullies out there, and there are people who are willing to use their power, what's the word I'm looking for? Not irresponsibly, but inappropriately. There are people who've been put in jail for long periods of time for refusing to reveal a source. And how long are you willing to go to the mat because somebody is being inappropriate until a higher power can step in and say, no, you can't do that. We live in a nation of laws, right? And what I love about the law, and why I went to law school, and why I continue to work in the law, even though sometimes it just makes me want to bang my head against a wall, is that it provides rules. I'm a rule girl. I like rules, because when you don't know what to do, there's a playbook. Like, what do I do? I have no idea what to do. Okay, well, here in Article 4, Chapter 6, Verse 3, it says, okay, here's what you do. Great. Now we all know what to do. We're all playing by the same rules. Then the grounds are fair. But that only works when everyone plays by the rules. The rule of law is only as good as everyone's willing to respect the rule of law. And so I can tell you what the law is, and that's great. And these are the rules. The rules are you don't have to reveal your sources, period. It's very simple. You don't have to. Will everyone respect that? No, they won't. So how long do you have to go without revealing your sources? Until your courage wears out. How long are you willing to fight power? How long are you willing to be bullied by the people in charge of your community? How long are you willing to go to jail if need be to protect this person? And sometimes your career's on the line, because if you reveal a source, then no other source is ever going to trust you again. So are you willing to say, all right, that's it, I'm done with this because I don't have the stomach for it? And that's understandable. If you're not willing, I mean, I wouldn't last 6 hours in jail. I can tell you that right now. I've been in the jail in my professional context. Let me make that clear. In my professional context, I have been in the jail many times. It smells. It's awful. I hate going there, and I know I can get out whenever I want. It's an awful place. I couldn't do it. And could I last a month to protect somebody's name? I don't know if I could. So don't beat yourself up if it comes to that and you don't think you can do it. There are people who can do it and people who can't. And if that's not for you, then that's not for you. Most people, it doesn't come to that. There's maybe a handful of people in the world that it comes to that. More often than not, it's just some, on a smaller scale, somebody just trying to intimidate you, somebody just trying to make your life difficult on a smaller scale. But how willing are you to stand up to that? That's the question. The answer is easy. The questions are harder.
Lori, what I love is about how you touch on something that I guess we don't often talk about in a classroom setting, and that's intestinal fortitude.
That's my favorite phrase. I use it all the time.
Right? I mean, bravery. I mean, we talk a lot about, the definitions and where it falls under, but when you come right down into real-time practice, it really is a matter of how brave can you be and to know where your limitations are. I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, wow. I mean, I've known journalists who have gone through all of that, been subjected to lawsuits, had their windows shot out, were thrown in jail for a little while. I mean, it's very real. And as you say, it's not going to be everybody, probably a fraction, but basically that's kind of an element in everybody's life who makes the public welfare their personal concern.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I have all those. I mean, they're kind of old saws, but I have those plaques all over my wall in my office. Well-behaved women never make history. If I'm too strong for you, that's your problem. Just those things to remind myself that if you're not making waves, if you're not making somebody mad, you're probably not doing much of anything. Because you're going to make people angry because the status quo is easy. And changing things and speaking truth to power is hard. And I think that's, this is way off topic here, but I think that's kind of what leads me to humor, which, people say all the time, how do you jive being a judge and being a lawyer with being a stand-up comic and writing funny things? And that's my way of speaking truth, because I think you can do it if you're funny a whole lot easier than you can in other ways. And I always use King Lear as an example, that in King Lear, the fool was the only one who could speak truth to King Lear. He was the only one allowed to tell King Lear the truth.
Well, you bring up a really interesting element because, we in previous classes, we had talked about writing style and voice. And some people are naturally really good at humor. And I agree with you. If you can infuse some humor, you are able to make some issues or your views very pointed on it in a way that's easy for people to digest.
It makes it more palatable because you're not angry and you're not shoving anything down anybody's throat. You're just making a joke. And then it kind of worms its way into somebody's brain, and then they think about it. And they go, oh, huh.
Yes, that's very true.
Without being aware that that's what they're doing.
Now, here's something in your bailiwick. Access to courtrooms and court documents. I think I can't, oh, I know, we had Tony Messenger speak a few days ago, and he talked about how he was barred from a courtroom hearing because they said that he hadn't complied by filling out a press request to attend. And of course, in the end, he argued that, fought it, and they let him into the court because that's his right. But with all these bogus procedures, I think, against the press, I mean, how common is that becoming where you have to fill out a request to attend a hearing? And, what is our, the basic right to courtrooms and documents? Especially in light of people who will tell, these bureaucrats who would tell you, oh, no, I'm not allowed to give that to you. Or there's a protocol, you haven't completed the protocol.
Well, those are two different questions. Documents and courtrooms are completely different questions. So let me answer the easy one first. The easy one is documents, and those are super easy to get. More often than not, you can just walk up to the court clerk's office and say, I would like to see whatever file, and they'll just hand it to you. Court records are generally open records. A lot of courts even have them online these days, and you don't have to get off your tush. You can just kind of sit where you are and find them online. Sometimes you have to pay a few cents for the copies, but I will pay a few cents not to have to get out of my chair all day long. But court records are easy to get. If you can't get them for that easy, sometimes they're and usually this will come up in criminal cases more so than civil cases. Civil cases are almost always just you walk in, you get it. I'd like to see it, and they go here. It is remarkably easy. If you want to, and you can do that for nosy reasons. If you want to find out what's going on in your cousin's divorce, you can just go to the courthouse and ask to see the file, and they will show it to you. There are certain documents that are sealed. Like domestic violence is sealed often, child protective services documents are sealed, and those things should be. But for the most part, you can get anything. In some criminal cases, you might have a little more trouble. In that case, you can file an open records request. How you do it varies, I would imagine, from state to state. In the state of Georgia, I can tell you it is super simple. You just write on a piece of paper, I'm making an open records request. I would like whatever. And you just list what you want and you hand it to the clerk, and then they've got 48 hours to give it to you or tell you why they're not giving it to you within 48 hours. That's simple. And I'd imagine it's something similar in the other 49 states. And generally, if you just type into any search engine, how do I make an open records request in Massachusetts, New York, Alabama, there's a form you can usually find, but you don't even usually need the form. There are exceptions to that. If it's an ongoing criminal investigation, often you cannot get the records because you can't interfere with an ongoing criminal investigation. And that makes sense. You don't want to interfere with the ability of the police to get the bad guy. You don't, again, domestic violence, that kind of thing, certain sex crimes, you can't get the information, and that's for protection of the victim, or you can get it, but it'll be redacted in some ways. You can't get certain people's names off of it. You can't get certain financial information. If it's a credit card theft, the credit card number is going to be blacked out. Our social security number is going to be blacked out, that kind of thing. But paperwork is generally very easy to get, and you can just ask for it. And if you don't know where to start asking, ask the court clerk. If it's in the courts, if it's not in the courts yet, if it's still under investigation or whatever, ask the clerk at the police station. Now, courtrooms, that's a different question. So question number 2, courtrooms. Courtrooms, generally speaking, are open to the public, as they should be, because we like to have transparency in the courtrooms, because they hold everybody accountable, and our justice system should not occur in secret. Sometimes there are issues. Those issues, and I can tell you this from a judge's perspective, are when the courtroom's packed and you just don't have enough room in the inn to put that many people in. You have to limit it to people who need to be there. And so how are you going to make that determination who needs to be there? Well, defendants obviously need to be there. Their lawyers need to be there. Witnesses need to be there. Okay, well, now let's see how much room we have. And I don't know where Tony's problem was. I can tell you where I live, there is a form to fill out, but that's only if you are recording anything. And that's because of the privacy issues of the other people in the room. Because although the defendant may or may not have any privacy issues, because this is all about that case, or the parties, there's other people in the room, the bailiff, the court reporter, the witnesses who have privacy issues, the other people sitting in the gallery, they may not want to be on the news. And so they're just certain, and in my courtroom, for example, it's just a little 1-page form. It's simple to fill out, and no one has ever actually filled it out. That's how often it gets used, but you just fill it out, and I would make a determination as to whether or not the importance of the public to know what's going on would outweigh the privacy concerns of the people in the room. And generally speaking, the answer is yes. But that only happens when there's a recording of some kind.
Well, you're right about that, because Tony Messenger did specify that they were trying to use it in general to keep, the not filling out a form, to keep him from coming in. But he was clear that only has to do with the tape recording. I'm not recording anything. I'm coming in with paper and pen. And so, yeah.
With paper and pen, anybody can come in.
You're right. But I think that it's interesting for other people to realize, because sometimes when a person of authority says, "Oh, I'm sorry, you can't come in," it's intimidating. And if you don't know,
right,
the specific reason why you might be barred as a journalist, the tape recording, then some young people, inexperienced people might, I'm not allowed to come in. So I think that's good. I think it's good that you're clear about that, what it is.
Right. Well, and that's why I said earlier, the rule of law is only as good as the people who are willing or not willing to respect it.
Yes, right. And, in the few moments that we have left, I would love it if you could address, copyright and fair use.
Okay. Because I'll sum up a whole law school class.
Yeah, exactly.
5 minutes. Okay, well, copyright is the ownership of intellectual property. Intellectual property is the ownership of ideas, things that you can't touch. Like in a book, for example, okay, here's a book that is within arm's reach, an old classic here, Stephen King's Cujo. So the copyright of this is not just the physical book itself, right? But the words in the book in any form. So if I were to retype the book, that would still be his intellectual property. If I were to read the book into a tape recorder, it would still be his intellectual property. It would, so it's the words inside the book in any form. So if you write a 600-word column, however it gets reprinted or spoken or whatever, that's the copyright. And copyright, there's no magic to copyright. You own the copyright when you write it. If you just put that little C thing, you've got the copyright. That's it. There's no registry. There's no magic about it. There is a registry, but you don't have to register it in order to have the copyright. Now, who owns the copyright to what you've written? That depends on the contract you have with whoever publishes it, and that's too much to get into right now. Okay, fair use. So when you're using somebody else's copyrighted material, you can use it in certain limited circumstances. Those certain limited circumstances are fair use. Fair use tends to be things like parody. So you can kind of make fun of something, which is how things like Saturday Night Live gets away with what they get away with, because they're just making fun of things. Things like quotes for limited purposes, things like that. You can't just take something in its whole, and also how much of it you're using. So, and what kind of effect it would have on the commercial purpose of the original work. So if you had a 10-line poem that you had written, and I were to quote 8 lines of that, that would be basically the whole thing. So that would not be fair use if I were to use it at the top of one of my chapters in my book. You know how they have quotes sometimes. But if I were to just use 1 line, that probably would be, because if I were to use most of the thing, then no one would want to go look at your poem later. So there's a bunch of different considerations that a court would use to determine whether or not it's fair use. How much of it, how much effect it would have on the commercial nature of the original use, whether or not you're using it for reporting. Like, journalists can use more than fiction writers. If you're using it for a news story, to say, this is what we're talking about here as part of a factual thing, you could use a little bit more than you could in other circumstances. I'm blanking on what the others are, but there's no bright line rule. It's not like you can say, oh, well, if I check these boxes, but you want to be you don't want to use other people's stuff if you can help it. Use your own. Don't use other people's pictures. Don't just Google search a picture that fits your article and slap it onto yours. Don't ever do that. Everyone does that. Don't do that. Take your own pictures, even if they're terrible. Or sometimes I purposely use terrible pictures just because I think it's funnier to use a bad picture where it's just like aggressively terrible than to use a fake picture. Or a picture that I don't own, because I'd rather just not get in trouble. People own their and a lot of times it just use the golden rule. Would I be mad if somebody did this to me? If somebody used my work this way, would that make me mad? Or would I be flattered? Or would I just be happy for the publicity? And copyright, or another way around it is to just use old stuff if you're looking for quotes, because copyright lasts for 70 years beyond the death of the copyright holder. So if you just only use Jane Austen quotes, you're good. Or Shakespeare, you can use whatever you want. There's no copyright on that.
Laura, you gave us such a great overview today, and I'm really grateful. I want to turn it over to Professor Tumolo, because I know he probably has some questions.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm still with what you were saying, Lori, about the messages that you have in your office that affirm you're going to piss people off, that you're going to say things and do things that are going to upset people. And that's part of your job, particularly as a journalist. You're saying that's, if we're speaking the truth, not everyone's going to like hearing the truth. So I appreciate that. And I also appreciate how you've made a distinction between, there's questions, is it legal? But then that doesn't, there's also the question, is it ethical? You're kind of saying just because it's legal, you still need to ask, is it ethical? So I think that's helpful too. And for our
Yeah.
journalism
I
students.
tell my clients all the time, because they come in and they get mad because something will be wrong but not illegal. And I tell them all the time, there's no law against being a jerk. You know, you can be a huge jerk and be perfectly within your legal rights.
Yeah.
Nothing I can do about that.
And you still may have a significant negative impact on others.
Oh, huge. But there's no law against it.
Yeah. And I think at Eastern Nazarene College, our students in particular, I think they're attracted to the school's mission for social justice. So I think a number of our journalists are our students are really interested in being a voice for justice.
Good.
So I'm
thinking get more of them.
Yes, we want more of them. We need more of them.
Yes.
I'm thinking of this bigger question, maybe for us as consumers of media as well as producers. And one thing I'm concerned as a person who really values communication is what I see in our society, that we're growing increasingly divided as a society. The United States in particular, other cultures, but the US in particular, we're divided on political lines, on religious lines. And I think there's a role that the media is playing in fostering or fomenting that division. One example is with the coronavirus. You know, here it's April. Just a month ago, there was a survey done, and it asked people, how serious do you believe the coronavirus is as a public health threat? And what the article pointed out is that if you got your news from one source, Fox News in particular, you had a very different perspective on how serious it was. And if you got your news from CBS, ABC, CNN, a whole bunch of other sources. And this article went on to point out that it said at least that there's concern at Fox News that they might get sued. There might be a legal claim against them because of the information that they put out was not accurate about the seriousness of coronavirus, and it led people to not take precautions. I'm just concerned maybe with that case in particular, but more broadly, what responsibility do journalists and media have for the current division that's in our society and for these different perspectives on reality? And what could we do to have a kind of journalism that is committed to the truth and is committed to building a coherent society?
Facts are apolitical, I believe. And that is, of course, what you asked, an enormous question that I could probably talk your ear off for about 2 hours, maybe more. We'll stop and get lunch and then talk for another 2 hours. But facts are apolitical. Science is apolitical. If you use the scientific method, it comes out with a result that does not care what channel you watch or what politician you favor. It is what it is. The results are the results. 2 + 2 is 4, no matter what your political beliefs. And I think that is the primary job of journalists, is to, well, let me change my sentence here. I know I stopped in the middle of a sentence, but let me start another one. When I choose what news I'm watching or what news I'm reading, because I read more than I watch, I don't like adjectives and adverbs. I don't. And I tend to read sources that don't use them, that tend to be fairly dry, because to me, that reads as more factual. especially no adverbs, just because I hate them in general. But I don't like to be told what to think. I especially like sources, and most of what I read is online, just because it's 2020. But I like sources that won't just say, and here's what it is, but and here's where it is, with a hyperlink to the source, because I am a source documents girl.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want to be told what to think about something. I like reading a summary because sometimes I don't have time to get to it, but I don't want to be told about a lawsuit. I want to be able to have a hyperlink to the pleadings.
Yeah.
I want a hyperlink to the study that shows that this is the course that something's going to take. So I can look at it for myself. You know, I've taken a lot of statistics classes. I've been to law school. I can look at a lawsuit or read a court decision and see for myself what it reads. And it's stunning to me because, I'm fluent in legalese, which is a completely different language in English, even though the words are the same. And I'll read an article that says the Supreme Court says X. And in this groundbreaking decision, this justice said this about this, and here's the decision. And I'll click on the decision and I'll read it myself, and I'm like, nope, doesn't say that. Says something completely different. And then I'll have to go around to all my friends and everyone I know going, yeah, I know what you read, but I'm telling you, I read it and this is what it says. And everyone will argue with me. And I go, okay, well, you read the decision and then we'll have this conversation, because I'm not going to talk to anyone who hasn't actually read the source document. So I think everybody feeds off each other and they get their opinion second and third hand. So the more you can go to source documents, the better. Don't take anyone's word for anything. And so for what it's worth, as a consumer of journalism, I always appreciate being linked to the sources instead of having to go find it myself, especially since just about everything is online and you can hyperlink it pretty easily. As a writer of journalism, when I do my legalese columns, even though I'm sure no one ever clicks on them, when I'm talking about a particular law or a particular decision, I always put the hyperlinks in there. If you want to read this 90-page Supreme Court decision, have at it, here it is. But I did it for you, and here's 600 words of me telling you what I think it means.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, there's so much you're saying, but two things I'll pull out. I've never heard someone say, oh, in journalism, I don't like adjectives and adverbs. I've never heard it that clear, but it makes so much sense what you're saying. Like even the words liberal and conservative, left and right, those are adjectives.
They are.
That they try to get the reader thinking a certain direction, and it's not the facts.
No.
I really like what you're saying about adjectives, and then about going to the source. It's good journalism, but it's also good consumption of journalism. So thank you.
Well, you're welcome.
I got the same thing. I was thinking, wow, what a great guideline to realizing when you're being manipulated into a particular direction.
Yeah.
Adjectives and adverbs. I'm going to, in fact, I'm going to probably do some reading after we hang up, and I'm going to see how much of that I run into. But Lori, don't you feel that in some ways you probably encountered that? Let me rephrase that. I think a lot of readers don't understand the difference between commentary and reporting, right?
Oh, sure.
That's part of the problem here. When people say,
Sure.
oh, the media, they're so biased and they're trying to get, well, in commentary, you're supposed to have a strong opinion, but that's opinion. It's not reporting necessarily. Well, there's a lot of reported columns, but.
Right. Well, yeah. And they will reprint, or not reprint, I don't know. My language is newspaper and my habits are online. So I use like this mix of vocabulary, but
Yeah.
people will repost, opinion pieces as news.
Mm.
And sometimes the opinion pieces are very interesting and very well researched and very well reasoned, but they're still opinion pieces. And in those pieces, adjectives and adverbs are just fine because they're opinion pieces and there's a time and a place for everything.
Mhm.
But they're not news. This is what this guy thinks about this issue.
Yes.
And this is how he came to his conclusion. And that's fine because that's his goal. To persuade. They're persuasive pieces. And you can agree with him or disagree with him, but that's his goal. But when people, yeah, you're right. People will post them as news and like, oh, look, this came from the New York Times. The New York Times is so biased. And it's like, no, this particular writer has a bias and they're not pretending they don't. That's their goal. But you have to distinguish that from the front page, which has a different goal, which is to say, this is what happened, versus the editorial page, which says, and this is what this person thinks of it.
Lori, I'm so grateful to you for making all these clarifications. And I know that many of these things are obvious to us, but for people who are new on the journalism scene, students and all of that, I think it's the kind of thing where people have an idea of what it is, but they're too embarrassed to ask for the clarification because they don't want to appear uneducated in a field that they're pursuing. So I think it's wonderful how you've been able to distill these very complex concepts, just like your column, legally, into easily understood, digestible bites. And I know that this video is going to be helpful to so many. I really want to thank you so much for being here today. And I'll just let Steve make some closing remarks, and then we'll bid you adieu and thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really had a good time.
I'm glad you had a good time because we did too. And thank you, Judge Lori Duff, for educating me, educating us, and I believe we'll be passing that on to many others. So thanks, and we'll look for you. We'll now look for you. You're on YouTube. You're all over. So
I'm easy to find.
So thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.
We'll see you soon, Judge. Thanks so much, and we'll see you very, very soon. And I'm sure this will be circulating everywhere.
Uh-oh.